before starting, maybe Jara Rocha can explain a few ideas about the DONE edition of this year, and then we will continue with Helen and Cassandra. Thank you very much for being here tonight, Helen, Cassandra, and the team of DONE. And sorry again for the technical problems.
Thank you so much, Irene, and yeah, we are so excited to finally have this project presented. Thank you all for being here, and especially to the artists for having yeah, so for using your time to present with us tonight. So somehow in line with last year's DONE edition, which was titled Non-Supervised Imaginations, and somehow was our start as a curatorial team to discuss about power relations that magnetize around mechanic operations and procedures of different complexities, and that can be identified in the plastical and also in the semiotic materiality of the image. On this year's edition, we decided to somehow like concretize a little bit more and focus on the relational aspect of a very like canonic kind of circulation of image and representation, which is the masquerade. Also, of course, to identify which tensions and which limits revolve around this more than human masquerade, no? Like when categories of humanity and of face or frontality can be problematized. So we had the chance, the opportunity to discuss in different conversations or exchanges with theoreticians and artists whose practice is somehow like in relation to this context or topic, and maybe I can leave it that the more than human masquerade somehow already comes with a lot of tensions and of problems which are there to trigger some, I don't know, space-time of togetherness, no? Like to see what emerges or magnetizes around the topic. Yeah, so I don't want to take more minutes with this. So please, Cassandra, Troyan, and Helen Pritchard, feel welcome to start your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hara. Thank you to everyone at the foundation, and then also to to the curators at DONE and to Hara for that introduction to the larger project. And so what we wanted to do is to first kind of try to contextualize some of the other research that we've been doing that has sort of led up to this project, and that, of course, this project, I think, for us provided a special opportunity to think about the work in relation to this more than human masquerade, but then also particular ideas around sort of vision and opticality that we found to be in relation to the larger ideas of this sort of thematic and exhibitions. And so for us, this work originally began and was sort of triggered in a kind of accidental almost way after we had both attended a multi-species storytelling conference in 2019 that was hosted at Linnaeus University in Växjö, Sweden, where I teach. And there was a call after the conference about trying to see what types of creative responses people wanted to sort of make in relation to the the conference. And I think for us, we were really struck by what we saw as a particular absence of, the sort of narratives that we were feeling are sort of fundamental to try to tell some sort of story of multi-species entanglement that is actually thinking about these capitalist, colonial, and sort of racialized structures and paradigms that are, sort of essential to that. And I don't know, Helen, if you want to say anything about that sort of moment, or then how we began working.
Yeah, and I think that we were very much kind of thinking back to some of those propositions around multi-species storytelling from people like Elaine Gann, from people like Donna Haraway, which were very much, making explicit the importance of engaging with kind of colonial violence and thinking about multi-species storytelling in terms of solidarity, and especially with a kind of, key kind of focus on visual culture and the figures that we tell these stories with in relation to that. So, I guess at this conference, we met afterwards in the bar and we started to share our kind of concerns and our thoughts around what was happening in this area, in this field, and how actually, we might kind of think collectively and in terms of like taking responsibility for some of the narratives that are being told in multi-species storytelling.
Yes, and I think, one thing that in terms of the stories that for us, we of course knew that we wanted to write something together, but that we were also really wanting to challenge and think about, well, what would be something that would really require us to be quite critical of our positions in, in an institution, in particular positions of, within Europe and, our whiteness and things like that, and not in a, I think a kind of self-reflexive, institutionalized sort of unlearning oppression way, but really trying to take these questions of, what would a multi-species storytelling look like that really tried to take seriously these questions of addressing, colonialism, addressing these various histories of violence. And so that the stories really were developing out of that. And then many of the things that were also kind of happening in the world, and in particular, many of them written in the sort of height of the beginning of COVID, and for us really seeing the ways that the world was populated with, a new sort of understanding of nature, and this idea, this discourse of nature is healing, and sort of the proliferation and presence of, of animals, such as seeing one of the figures in the stories is the penguins who are at the Shed Aquarium in Chicago, which was one of the early sort of viral videos of these penguins who, because everything is shut down, are suddenly able to walk through the aquarium enclosure. And, for many, this being a sort of very cute and fluffy moment, but for us trying to see, well, what if we actually reflect upon, is this a particular moment where the penguin is also understanding their relation to being a captive animal, and sort of seeing that perhaps this institution for us is a site of leisure, of a site of education, but of course for them, a kind of a site of capture. And, and so those types of narratives, we really looked for them, and, and many sort of existing places that they were within, sort of the news and whatnot, and then sort of use that as a point to sort of work with and develop these, these stories within our practice.
Yeah, and very much, as we were thinking about some of these questions that had come up, we were thinking about, well, what does it mean to tell these stories? What are the types of methods of solidarity, of resistance, of refusal that actually we might work with? And how can we start to think kind of beyond the idea of kind of like more than human or multi-species storytelling as, thinking with or designing with or becoming with but actually kind of shift it into a place where we're really taking seriously what it might mean to speculate on a type of trans-species solidarity, and not just wanting to kind of reproduce the violence that's already present in many of the ways in which stories are told about animals, plants, environments, and so on. And also trying to think about, some of the kind of histories, the particular kind of lineages of solidarity, of resistance, of refusal, and how we might kind of use that to build some of these practices. And I guess kind of like thinking about how can trans-species practices be a kind of activist practice, beyond, some of the ways in which these stories are currently being told.
And I think one text that became really crucial for us is this text called Accomplices Not Allies, that sort of written by an Indigenous perspective on abolishing the ally industrial complex. And they have this part where they're addressing sort of exactly academics and intellectuals and thinking about how they often use institutional power and knowledge and skill as a way of sort of like hoarding that rather than trying to sort of collectivize it or sort of use it collectively. And and one of the points being the kind of the image of the hammer, and saying an accomplice as an academic would seek ways to leverage resources and material support and or betray their institution to further liberation struggles. An intellectual accomplice would strategize with, not for, and not be afraid to pick up a hammer. And so I think for us, especially within this work, as we transition to talk about it, kind of thinking of that idea of not being afraid to pick up the hammer as something, which they're meaning, of course, of the idea of like doing the on the ground work, doing the dirty work, the things that aren't often associated with some sort of, kind of recognition or prestige, but also the ways within the DONE, in the Mouth of the Polar Bear project, how we're looking at and thinking at different forms of sabotage and the animal's particular relationship to different forms of technology, and how they're sort of working various forms of sabotage in those spaces as well.
And so, Cassandra, shall we move into talking about the project?
That would be great.
Okay, so you can see now that we're sharing the screen, and we're going to introduce some of the background to the project, and then we're going to screen some of the videos and read some of the texts that were generated as part of the In the Mouth of a Polar Bear, the undead feeling of the world. And so as part of the work that we've been doing with the Anti-Menagerie project, we've been developing a space for shared practices as a kind of active and living archive in collaboration with comrades, with our students. We've invited different speakers and guests to participate in workshops, so we can really start to think about what it might mean to build a collective practice around some of these issues. And the Anti-Menagerie website has become a space to aggregate conversations, collaborations, and research that stems from our investigations into trans-species solidarity and resistance. And so this site was really created as a way to contain some of the work, and as a way to kind of think through some of these interdisciplinary methods as a kind of digital lab, and a way for us to rethink and reimagine these types of solidarity practices that we might pursue.
Yes, thank you, Helen. And so I guess maybe, Helen, if you want to just scroll, and that if I'm sure if you've come to this event in some way, you've also seen this website. And in terms of the navigation of it, then that button on the left is able to move and sort of collect the images to the bottom of the page. But you know, this, I think for us, something that's really important with this project is, you know, and thinking about it, of course, as artistic research, is being able to include and sort of show these particular, you know, traces of whether they're manuals for the various technological sort of devices or for the robotic figure of Spot that features within, you know, within the work, and being able to show and sort of extend the ways that these various, you know, sort of animals or non-human animals are in various ways animate or become animate through the, you know, various mediated forms of mediation that they, you know, sort of exist within. And so, you know, the project itself, much of it is created from sort of found videos that we have, you know, taken from YouTube and various places, and looking particularly at, you know, as the description says, within a production from BBC called Spy in the Wild, and which uses animatronic animals with video cameras in their eyes as a way to try to gain some sort of, you know, a more intimate relation to these animals, which often also has extremely sort of violent and sort of traumatic encounters that are folded into them and sort of produced under the auspice of this being, you know, educational. And yeah, but those, as I was saying, being one aspect of the videos. But Helen, if you want to talk a little bit about how the, you know, you sort of worked with and thought about the sort of footage and using the programming of Spot.
Yeah, so as Cassandra was saying earlier, you know, we were very much making this project during the context of COVID, and you know, we were seeing like this actually kind of like a reinforcement of the idea of species. So the reinforcement through like the penguins wandering through the empty aquariums, but also, you know, along comes a very different type of reinforcement of the species through the robotic animal Spot. And this is one of the species, I guess, that this project engaged with. So we decided we wanted to bring together two stories of species to tell. One which would focus on the Boston Dynamic robotic dog Spot, and the other that would focus on the polar bears and the cams in the wild, and a particular polar bear named Binky. And so during COVID, you know, not only did we see this kind of rise of things like the nature is returning memes, or this kind of the animals that were circulating on Twitter, but the other thing that of course started to happen was that many of the military technologies that have been used for things for deliveries or for kind of control and population control actually started to be brought into a domestic realm. And through the COVID period, there was actually kind of a huge shift that took place with the Boston Dynamic robot, in which it moved from being a solely military object to actually being taken into the domestic realm, being changing hands in terms of ownership, and being very, very much promoted as an imaginary that could kind of contribute to the COVID crisis, whether in terms of things like remote doctors being able to perform their services through the use of this robotic robot, or the imaginary of it providing help in the home, or the imaginary of it being able to deliver essential goods. And so we kind of see this entry of a kind of militarization, right, of the context. And there were also many different imaginaries of Spot, also to be able to patrol citizens, to maintain social distancing. And so kind of a huge proliferation of the presence of this robotic dog. And this robotic dog, of course, is kind of highly equipped with LiDAR, with computer vision, in order to kind of sense and scan its environments. And so one of the the things that we wanted to do as we started to work with the footage of both the polar bear and the robotic dog was to actually kind of get inside some of the ways in which it was being promoted virally, and the ways in which also the types of tools that it was being used to imagine its use. And one of these is a computer simulation program that's been designed for individuals, for companies to be able to take up, to kind of create speculative designs for Spot, whether in the health industry or whether in your school, in your art exhibition, and so on. And so part of the way in which we thought about kind of turning the footage against itself was actually to kind of perform a number of experiments within the Spot's world, within the computer simulated world of Spot. And so this is how we created some of the footage for the videos.
And I think that we, sort of using this as a jumping off point, and that I don't know if we want to say anything else explicitly right now about it, Helen, before we go into or I can sort of explain the next part that we're going into. But so now what we wanted to do is to extend and to deepen in talking about some of the themes of this, but particularly through the texts that then accompany the various videos that are on the page, and that we wanted to do that live now. And so we will show, and sort of go back and forth, sort of weaving in the videos and their sort of respective texts, or ones that we're sort of, picking, and that we've selected a few here to read and watch together with you right now. And yeah, and then of course other engagement and sort of going deeper, and then if you have any questions, that of course we'll have time to do that in the sort of after we've shown the work. And before I show the first one, I just want to tell everyone that if you have any photosensitivity triggers, that this one has a lot of flashing images and light, so to be aware of that for this first one. But it's only 1 minute, so if you can't watch that, you'll be able to, I think, watch the other ones. So I'm going to cue that up. In the National Geographic series Do or Die, they present real-life scenarios to ask viewers, what would they do in traumatic or life-threatening situations? Binky the polar bear makes his debut in the video entitled In the Mouth of the Polar Bear. Based on an incident on July 29, 1994 at the Alaska Zoo in Anchorage, Australian tourist Catherine Warburton jumped over 2 safety fences to get a better picture of Binky while he was sleeping. He took this opportunity to bite her leg and try to pull her in through the bars of his cage. Presented in nauseating viral video editing style, replete with bad CGI reenactment and aggressive narration, the incident of Binky the polar bear's attack is treated as a crime scene with Binky featured as the perpetrator. In these few still shots, Binky is caught in the crosshairs of the camera as weapon. In the center of the viewfinder, Binky is marked as a specimen to be classified and monitored. He is dangerous. He is an example of why we must not forget that despite his enclosure, wild animals are still never tame. He is an example of why we must not forget their power. He is made captive once over in these establishing frames that double as mugshots. To destabilize this frame calls into question which is greater, the logic of the law or the law of nature. To refuse the frame, to refuse to be an eyewitness, to refuse to be held accountable for the careless violence of others. The Zoom used against itself as a form of sabotage through disruption, erasure, and escape.
A robotic snowball rolls towards a polar bear to get the close-up shot. A hydraulic-legged dog with onboard speakers, thermal cameras, and a strobe light runs through a group of striking workers at a lithium mine. The dog-like robot gathers thermal images and navigates the tricky terrain via LiDAR, scanning up to 100 meters away that it sends back to the remote operator over a 5G connection. If the striking workers get close to the faceless dog-like robot, they may be injured. Bones may be broken in the hydraulic limbs of the dog or rubber bullets fired, bone breaking across 16 channels. Meanwhile, the Blizzard Cam gathers images of 2 sets of cubs as they emerge from winter maternity dens and are stranded with very little food as the sea ice breaks away. Endurance of the flesh of the world. Sweat, skills, intelligence, flesh, bone, skin and labor, and other exploitable resources assembled as commodity through the sensing, scanning, and acquisition of images. Laser robotic visions enroll the body, human or polar bear, as the temporal mediator between the technical and geographic world. Animals, humans, and the thickness of flesh, testifying to this image-based violence. Faceless for image capture, back depth in visual frame, back fisheye image, front left depth in visual frame, front left fisheye image, front right depth in visual frame, front right fisheye image, left depth in visual frame, left fisheye image, right depth in visual frame, right fisheye image. In addition, acute roll cage of an integrated radiometric thermal camera, pan tilt zoom with a 30 times optical spherical camera, high sensitivity microphone for auditory inspections, a payload looking through you. Sensing, scanning, framing with a rotation rate of 5 to 20 Hertz, the rolling robotic snowball camera and the hardened, awkward gait of the robot dog mark the differing operative realities between flesh and bones and the muscular metal lines of the hardware. Inertial frames, sensor frames, object frames, body frames become the optic and the operative technology for the production, disciplining, and maintenance of population, whether polar bear or human, frames of violence.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh!
Nurturing a snowball, the eye of the land rolls along as distraction, deviation, riding a lens, waiting for another egg that already contains the earth to emerge, and with it solidify the core, the whimper, the gurgle, slow digital clicking, taken away by the waves and drowned at sea, or refused to say goodbye. Unlike the other animatronic figures in BBC Spy in the Wild, the polar bear spy cams are not actual polar bears. The bear's sheer size and status as the largest carnivorous predator on land makes a robotic rendering of them impossible. Instead, the cameras exist as camouflaged elements in their Arctic environment, such as an iceberg, blizzard snowdrift, or snowball. As the quintessential charismatic megafauna, the polar bear's curiosity leads to frequent destruction of the technologies there to surveil them. Curiosity is a point of obsession mentioned endlessly by those present to observe the polar bears. Curiosity is what captivates humans, although curiosity can also be a best practice of sabotage by testing the supposedly unbreakable structure of these devices of capture. Where does the violence actually reside? In the paws of the destroyer or the colonial eye and hand of the camera maker? The video begins and ends with Binky, a violent captive who is expected to perform his curiosity, just as his supposedly free counterparts in the wild. The polar bear, mascot of the climate crisis. We are forced to witness them suffer the brutality of their habitat loss and the ways in which this brings them into closer contact with humans through their desperation for food. To witness this as a viewer, without recourse to action other than sympathy, the only option is for this mode of viewing to be destroyed. The camera eye, zooming in and out, scanning the icy horizons, the gaze switching back and forth from a POV shot to a distant human perspective. Here, the polar bear is a captive even in their natural habitat. Each atmospheric tendency exists as an undead actor, eyes without a face, consuming the landscape while being of it and in it, yet removed from consequences. When the lights go out, no camera goes hungry. Rebuild, redesign, this time with better decoys and methods for diversion. The optics of this apparatus leave the polar bear with few choices, from static to electronic glitches and finally to black. Only through their mouths can the world expand again. No more tasks, no more games, no more tricks, toilating. Everything's a metaphor for everything. Run out of this ponytail headache, discounts on sleep for the nightmare. Even if I sleep a shrimp sleep, my dreams are like that of a whale's. Unruly teenage dolphins passing the puffer, head of wax, incorporate the salt. Through buoyancy, you outgrow your invisibility as curiosity and survival go hand in hand. Hang in there, smash the cam.
Get up, boy. Growl, stand up, do something. No more bear. He's coming.
This is a big, confident bear. This bear, like every boy, is intrinsically curious. He's walked almost a whole kilometre straight towards us, just to check us out. All other species of bear mostly eat plants and insects. Polar bears eat meat, and this one has his eye on me.
Yeah, looks like getting to the point where it's a little bit dodgy. It's mainly paying attention to us, solely, and got start goes and get out of here. He's getting to about, what is he? 10 meters, not good. Okay, drive. Go. Like disaster here. It's there. Paying too much attention. We just had to get out of it. Hang on. Oh, not good. But that just shows you the animal set. You can entirely trust.
She's coming closer and closer. Oh my God. She is enormous. She whiz. Really is why I've come here. To see these animals. To get to understand them. See them up close. Hey, bear. Oh my God. She's right here. Hey, bear.
All right. So, if I am not wrong, this is the time for the break and we come back after a couple of minutes.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, perhaps we can slowly return. Well, thank you, Helen and Cassandra for sharing. I have to say that I don't know. I have had like some contact with with the work during the last months, and still every time I orient attention to it like this, I become a little bit speechless. But in any case, of course, there are things that need to be said and conversations that need to happen. So maybe perhaps to break the ice, I can say something about actually to continue with the connection that I started in the presentation. I was thinking about the spectacular and specular techniques and infrastructures and architectures of both the menagerie and the menagerie and the masquerade, because of their intrinsic representational and also operational violences and damages. So it's just a comment about how, yeah, basically about how in your work, like something is brought to the forefront, no? Which is like how they are ongoingly active in the computational and ecocidal present, and yeah, this is maybe something that you want to comment on, like these techniques and infrastructures and architectures of the menagerie, and the well, we were talking about the masquerade, which is a different circus, if you allow me to use the expression. And maybe specifically about how you chose your method, like the method to work with this complexity and this ongoingness by using text and by using visuals and audio visuals in a very particularly structured site as well. But at the same time, to very actively refuse an instrumentalization. No, you like from the very beginning, it was very clear that this was the treatment, no, that needed to be carefully considered. How to bring this to the forefront without instrumentalizing it by means of explanation or of rigid linearity, or of even like consistency, no? So yeah, this maybe as a first zone of conversation, I would like to launch it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we were, really committed to, Hera, like you brought up, was, how can we work in a speculative way in terms of and an artistic research way, which actually is not around like highly instrumentalizing materials or like really seeking this kind of idea of the kind of finished object, but instead like really engaging in this process of kind of working with these different found materials, thinking about that relationship to the text that we were developing. So of course we were spending a long time like embedded with the viral videos of polar bears, of the robotic dogs. We were spending a lot of time embedded in all the grey literature. So the user manuals of the robotic dogs, the coding communities who are working on them, the police units who were trying and failing to use these dogs. So kind of actually thinking about how we could kind of to stay within that process, to not kind of, I guess, further bring a kind of over determination to this these kind of practices of solidarity, because I guess in some ways, and as you're picking up, you know, the menagerie, or the kind of, you know, the menagerie was all about kind of determining the hierarchy and categorization of species, and that kind of human hierarchy around that, and especially in relation to the state. And, you know, I think it's not an accident that Spot, the robotic dog, is a dog, right? It is a dog because it's made in a way in which it's supposed to be seen visually as, you know, still within the kind of hierarchy of, it's not a human-like robot, you know, it's still able to be controlled by the state, by the police, by the military, you know, by the corporate actor. And so we were really trying to think kind of against, I guess, these particular types of determinacy. And that's very much, I think, at the heart of that kind of commitment to, you know, having a kind of more open structure, I guess, within this commission as well. And also, you know, thanks to DONE for giving us that space, right, of an artistic research commission, which could have an open structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that, you know, something particularly about, you know, the ways, I mean, we were really thinking in terms of, you know, that yes, not wanting to instrumentalize the footage or the ways that we were working, but then also trying to see, well, what were the tools and methods we were using, and wanting to make sure that if we were using them, that they were specifically for, you know, kind of the construction, you know, against their own use, or sort of towards like a construction that is actually like deconstructing them simultaneously. And, you know, and very much thinking about that in relation to like the BBC spy camera eye. And then of course, you know, as we talk about its relation to, you know, sort of thinking of the, you know, the viewfinder frame as both a crosshairs and a sort of target for, you know, the image that's caught in the frame. And yeah, and I think that, you know, that this idea too of the menagerie, and this, you know, that being the kind of like overarching, let's say, a sort of thematic of our work is, you know, not only, as you're saying, Helen, like this history of the violence of categorization, but we really can also see the, you know, the lineage of how today, like the, you know, botanical garden and zoos are actually, you know, that was then the, you know, decision to turn these things which were before, you know, to be used as a show of imperial wealth and plunder, and using exotic animals as capital, but, you know, instead shifting it towards the idea of zoos now, which are seen, you know, as a form of like education, and that they're fulfilling these other sort of roles in society. And so that this expanding sort of terrain of not only in real life zoos and aquariums, but also that BBC and these other National Geographic, where, you know, a lot of this footage has come from, are, you know, very much working in this framing now of like edutainment. And so we see, you know, that the sort of violence of this and the particular narratives that are being proliferated are just continuing to sort of expand into all these other sort of visual fields. And we think it's, you know, it's extremely important to, you know, to remember that. And then, you know, when I think we can see that, we can of course see that the relation to the zoo and the prison, or that the way that the robo dog is being, you know, the same one that you see that's like dancing to, you know, Do You Love Me in a Boston Dynamics dog, is actually the same one that's going on, you know, military operations in, you know, or performing and assisting in drone strikes. But, you know, they're sort of using the, you know, basically like the branding in the media as a way to try to make that differentiation for us. And so we think it is, you know, so essential to be able to look at these particular histories of violence to understand how they are operating today.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a like what can be called also like an industrial continuum, no? Like this this we've been applying in other conversations. But I think the figure of the industrial continuum really applies to this this project, and how these figurations basically like navigate from one industry to another, and they go from the military to the edu-tainment, no, as you just mentioned. So in relation to, like, still in the method, but maybe like more towards the medium, one thing that also caught my attention very much is like the decision of using poetry, and well, maybe you can comment on this, on your use of poetry and poetics, maybe somehow in tension with the operations of narrative or of storytelling. Also, because at the very beginning of the presentation, you already said how the whole project of the anti-menagerie started, no? in the relation of this taking of storytelling, while not maybe including like urgent complexities, no? Like an urgent sensibility towards complexity. So yeah, it's also, and let me connect it just to not make like many questions, but to connect it with another one. There are plenty of tactics in the work, which are also like another like key element. You work with and about boycott and sabotage and virality and parafictionality and disruption and erasure and escape, and we could continue the list. So I find it very connected to the question of poetry, precisely because these kind of tactics might provide with other understandings of the circulation of problematics than that of the established like disciplinar, like monodirectional, linear kind of circulation of knowledge, even if it's of critical sort or wannabe critical sort. So can you comment a little bit on that, if possible?
I don't know, Helen, do you want me to, or I can at least maybe, did you want to go first, Helen? Or we can I think sometimes Zoom makes it so it's like that we're just like dun, 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 dun.
Same like, time, at the same time.
But Helen and I, we do talk with, can interrupt each other as well. Yeah, I think exactly, you know, what, you know, you were sort of saying in relation, at least I can maybe respond to the sort of use of, you know, poetry. As we don't know, I'm also, you know, a poet. And so that is, you know, a sort of medium that I work in quite frequently. And that some of this text also comes from a parallel book that I've written that's coming out this year that is called, you know, Against Capture, that is thinking about, you know, many of, you know, these particular forms of, you know, sort of trans-species solidarity and how we might forge that through a particular, you know, sort of horizon of abolition, and then thinking particularly about these sort of tactics of, you know, sabotage and escape and other ways of trying to, you know, to imagine sort of like formulations towards liberation. And so, yeah, I think that, you know, for this work and then bringing them in here, like, I don't know, I think it felt just important to do as a, you know, as a means of, once again, of not like shifting towards this impulse of instrumentalizing the sort of text or research in a particular, into only one particular form of writing. And I think even within this, you know, Helen and I, and, you know, and then the other work that we've done, I think have a capacity to sort of move through different sort of types of voice or sort of genres. And I think, you know, and even with my own thing, I say I am a poet in some sense, because I really don't consider, I really work in a much more multi genre sort of way in terms of all of the books that I've written. So I really believe that, trying to engage with text on, the sort of like terms of, sort of erasure or things that are wanting to kind of, I think challenge a lot of the things that we are wanting to also address in what happens through, a particular type of linearity or the sort of presence of a kind of narrative or narration, which, particularly if we think of the sort of object of these nature documentaries, that to be, the one behind the camera sort of telling a particular story of nature as you're looking at it is an extremely violent act. And so I think for us, we're trying to, in this work, it's a kind of balance of seeing, where are we kind of working as, I don't know, sort of like operators or, comrades in sabotage, to work through these different, sort of practices in a way where, we don't want to then just enter into the role of, well, we are also going to be the dominating narrator, even if we're like the decolonial one. Like that would be, I think for us, very absurd and wrong to think that we could do that just because we have better intentions or something. So I think it's been a real, process of us of like going back and forth and thinking of like, well, how can we do that? And always, I think, trying to step back and question, where is our role and what are the things that we do or do not want to reproduce?
Yeah, and I think also in terms of that, as Cassandra was saying, like so many of these trauma porn nature videos that are being circulated, they kind of ask, there are particular types of descriptions of narratives that also we were both thinking with the videos themselves, but also with the texts, how we could make their structures work against themselves. So from the polar bear videos, which ask you, how would you attack this polar bear if you were the person being attacked by the polar bear? So this kind of extreme violence, right through to the kind of hyperbole of the Boston Dynamic videos, which, position this as your pet or as your dog, completely obscuring the kind of militarization of the everyday with it. So, and the same really as well with the methods in relation to the videos. We were really thinking about, well, how is things like the zoom used, the frame, and how actually might we kind of turn these against themselves to tell quite a different story or to make a different type of visual figure here. And so I think, in terms of a kind of poetics, it's kind of like thinking about the kind of political possibilities of of this work, of the text of the videos, and I guess the kind of writing that also takes on the political problematics of actually what it means to tell the stories of animals, to tell the stories of these technologies that are taking the place of so-called species, and to kind of hold that actually, and to kind of stay with the violence, the very real and disturbing violence of both the story of Binky the polar bear and the story of Spot the dog.
Well, hello. I can also jump in the discussion, which I'm really enjoying. Congratulations for the project. I mean, I'm very touched by the impressions that you provoke in the videos and all the text creations and the different languages and everything. To take it on the last comment that you said, that of course taking these two characters, the Spot and the animatronics, you like in these situations you don't want to like criticize somehow. I'm a bit more of a scientist, so maybe I will have like a more practical question. Is like, because I can see that robotics in general, not in the hands of the military, has kind of usage for good. Like, I don't know, for example, one is will help understanding the brain, because because you need to embody an intelligence into robot and things like this. No? So, and at the end as well, I don't know, it just occurred to me that internet, as we know it now, it was thought by the military, the DARPANET, but then it was taken by universities, thanks God. But in a similar kind of, if we would like have got too bad on internet while it was a military idea, maybe I don't know, we would not be here. Well, I don't know. So on this, and I also, that is what we can comment on it, I see positive usages of the animatronics creatures, not the ones that you described, certainly, but I see like them being able to increase the scientific knowledge of animal behavior, for example, and make us more humble, because if we kind of know more about the intelligence of the social intelligence of animals and which animatronics creators will work and which will not work, or how then you can manipulate the social behavior of a group of animals. I mean, these are interesting questions that are addressed as well. I will leave it there if you want to comment.
Yeah, thank you. That's, I think of Marty for that. I think that's a super, and a super important point. And I think something that we've also thought about. I've spent a lot of time watching the Spy in the Wild thing. And before we started doing this, I was kind of like, when I found it, I was like, oh my God, Helen, you have to see this. And, and there's really like wide range of animals and environments that they use to, sort of engage with these various species, everything from chimpanzees to hippos to dolphins to meerkats. And, and I think when I first encountered it, that we were, sort of thinking like, well, could this provide, perhaps like a way to actually lead to the end of zoos? If we could actually be able to, to engage with animals in their, intended and sort of native environments, wouldn't this be, the ideal way to actually, experience or to see, a pod of orcas in the wild rather than seeing some, sort of sad, frustrated version of them in SeaWorld.
Yes.
And, but I think that, and thinking about that, but I feel for us, it becomes a question not so much of only the technologies, but seeing how they are being sort of utilized and optimized by, by the BBC, by National Geographic, and that are wanting, to sort of use them in a kind of trauma porn, clickbait, viral video way that is not really, sort of concerned with education. And that, in terms of what, a viewer is sort of exploring or learning through these encounters, especially when we see that there are particular incidents that are extremely like traumatic for, the animals that the people who are, of course, filming this, are setting up by, let's say having some seal camera that then they want a shark to attack, and various things that happen, or like bringing in a cobra to then sort of be present and attack a family of meerkats, these things that then have, for us, if we would say that they are educational, they're done at the sort of expense of entertainment by the fact that, these are traumatic experiences for animals to have, within their, environments. And, and so I think for us, like really wanting to be, really thinking about what is the context, that they're sort of created in and sort of circulating through. And then, as I was saying, of thinking if we can think of like the lineage of, and the idea of the menagerie and to present day, sort of zoos, but thinking of, and trying to draw and look at the relation between these as, many zoos today are also operated under the auspice of education, conservation, all of these things, but often, zoos are based on making money. And that, as we've seen that there's actually, much research that's been done that shows that like zoos do not actually care as like animals' welfare or like education as their main point. Specifically, you know, that when there's too many baby giraffes and because of concerns of inbreeding, they will actually kill the giraffes, and that there's been recent very traumatic, I think, incident that happened at a zoo in Denmark where they did that and decided to feed the baby giraffes to some tigers, and people were outraged, and then sort of realizing that this sort of thing happens all the time. And I mean, there's endless sort of examples of this. So yeah, so I think we want to be really, you know, critical, not only, I would say, of like the technology in of itself, but how it is being, you know, operating, and how it is sort of being particularly weaponized by these, you know, these different, you know, BBC, National Geographic, which can sort of be seen as like the sort of, you know, the, like that they are able to provide the sort of site of like a continual colonial British gaze. And so, yeah, so I think that that's really what we're wanting to, you know, I think focus on, you know, on that, and to try to really bring our attention and critique to those, you know, to those sort of ways that it circulates.
Thanks, totally. Yeah, because usually the good kind of usages that they turn out naive, like like you mentioned the robot dance, no, the Atlas dance and all this stuff. The really good usages don't become viral somehow. Yeah. Thanks.
And I would also like to join and thank you for your for the project and participation. And I think at least for me, this more poetic approach through, because I'm also like not as smarty, but kind of not from, I come from science, or my approach is sometimes more scientific. And I think that the use you've been doing of poetry in this case, it like sparkle a lot of ideas and emotions, and it maybe you could reach points that with something more technical, it's not possible. And this is something that I really appreciate. And then there's an idea of a possible like dystopian future. I don't know if you thought about if at some point we will need to add another species in this trans and multi-species mix, and this species can be the machines itself. If at some point through artificial intelligence we will have to consider those machines as another species to be like solidarity with them, and if we have to think about their rights and what this will be like the full circle, no, somehow that we reach this point where machines itself are considered like another species that live like among us.
Yeah, thanks for your question, and I guess the kind of dystopian future, or the kind of the species future. I mean, I think for us, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about and discussing actually is also in terms of, you know, what it might mean to abolish the category of species altogether. And so instead of kind of thinking of those kind of separations of like animal and machine, or kind of AI itself becoming kind of a new species, which might kind of enter into this hierarchy and animacy of species, but instead to really kind of think in terms of trans species, that actually you know, and I guess actually as some of that historical thinking on multi-species also, you know, was very much discussing, you know, to recognize these kind of entanglements of people, animals, plants, machines, in artificial intelligences, cloud infrastructures, political economies, and so on. And so I think, you know, perhaps I think the dystopian future would be that AI becomes recognized as a species, because in a way, almost that is actually kind of what the place that Spot the robotic dog is taking. And in a way, every time, you know, a machine becomes imagined as a species that actually holds in place that colonial imperial structure of species. And so, you know, I think you're very right to say, you know, if we imagined a dystopian future, you know, would it be that artificial intelligence was taken up as a species? And I think, you know, in a way, the kind of some of the politics around thinking trans-species is very much actually to kind of, I guess, move away from some of those categories.
Can I say something in relation to this? Because I am very touched by your use of this notion of the regime of frames, and also the regime of capture that Cassandra already mentioned. So frames, different frames, no? The regime of optic and operative and control frames, and capture, but also sense, like in the forms of sensing and acquisition and scanning. So I was thinking about these industrial and cultural and ideological frames, which include, of course, categories like the species. No, we can absolutely take species as one of those frames of delimitation of modes of existence, basically. And just wanted to ask you, just to celebrate like the exuberance of the work and the depth of the work, because it's really everything there. So I really encourage everyone to go and look at the videos and read the texts, because it's really present how, like, for example, the call for the abolition of the species is brought next to this figuration of the frame, for example, which already helps to understand how that might actually be a contemporary urgency. So nothing to do with like a long-term speculation. So and I will take this opportunity to speak or to ask about the other abolitions. Of course, there's the abolition of prison that's contained in the project, which is connected with the abolition of zoos, and which is connected with the abolition of species. Like there is this again the continuum. But I also wanted to ask about the abolition of cloud computing, which in fact is pretty much present in the assumptions, no? in the assumptions of what computational operations circulate or are activated for the very management of these presences, no? Of like some of these robotic presences or animated presences. So if you want to say a little bit about all those, it's a bit, for me, it's like the reversal of the industrial continuum or the industrial complex is actually the abolition continuum and the abolition complex. No, they are absolutely connected and in somehow in a relation of mutual dependency.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, thanks, Hera, for bringing that up. And as Hera knows, Cassandra and I are also working with the Institute of Technology in the Public Interest, and that's been an ongoing project during the last year, especially kind of thinking about some of these relations of cloud infrastructures. And so at the same time of, you know, sifting through polar bear images, the political economies of Spot the Dog, we were also being quite sharpened to the things that are happening in cloud infrastructures, computational infrastructures, and the way that they're organizing and structuring and I guess kind of also constraining the possibilities for solidarity as well. And, you know, one of the interesting things was that as we were working on this project, actually, it was a really rampant time of expansion of Spot the Dog. And during the time we were working on the commission, actually, Spot the Dog changed hands and the company was sold at numerous times. And it didn't kind of pass us by that, you know, that actually the moment that it got transformed from a military or police dog into a domestic delivery dog, delivery of services was actually the moment that it was bought up by SoftBank, one of the biggest cloud infrastructure companies. And there's some amazing images and footage of the SoftBank legged robots together with Spot the dog as this kind of new age of Spot the dog being able to deliver services. And of course, at that same time, Spot the dog then gets released with actually a complete shift in how it's operated. So it goes from being an autonomously operated kind of machine to actually something that is controlled by the cloud. And we really saw, this is such a significant shift, because suddenly, this dog was being sold and marketed to everybody from police forces to hospitals. And it had gone from actually a robot which operates locally to something which its services are controlled by the cloud provider or through the cloud. And not just that they're hosted there, but it's also owned by that infrastructure company. And so, yeah, there's a really, I think, kind of quite significant sort of industrial continuum, Hera, to use your term, between these cloud infrastructures, between the kind of what's happened during COVID with that kind of mass investment in things like these services such as the Uber services or delivery services and Spot the dog, and not to mention actually some of the concerns which were happening around things like population control, right? So actually this also state panic around the possibility of mass riots. So, that is very much the industrial continuum of these things. And of course, actually Binky the polar bear in these camera videos are also not separate from that, right? Because they were also kind of, I think really part of that cloud computational infrastructure imaginary of this kind of edutainment militarized space.
Yeah, I can just say something really quickly about, I love this phrase, the abolition continuum. And I think that, I would say that really structures, something that's very crucial to our larger work in various projects, and that it's not necessarily in here, but that the stories, and things inspired by really trying to think about, the idea of solidarity and, and something not as an abstract, sort of construct, but actually thinking of this work in relation to the other forms of, work that we've done with communities or organizing, and, and really seeing this as part of the necessary work of what it means to be like queer, anti-fascist, anti-racist, and really thinking about and learning from different forms of Indigenous solidarity and Indigenous resistance that, come up more in the, in the stories. And so really trying to, I think, learn and to see and continue to think that there is, such a rich history of those who have been, sort of working for and thinking about prison abolition, and that, this being a moment, especially of things from the George Floyd uprising, being, a huge moment of that, the possibility of like the abolition of the police being something that is not just a fantasy, but is actually something that is, coming into conversation. And people such as Miriam Kaba, who've been doing work for decades, trying, and like Ruth Wilson Gilmore, whose work is really a testament to how, this is not something that is, it's a necessity in order to imagine, our survival, not just as humans, but I really believe like our survival on this planet. And so I think that really trying to imagine and to think of these things in, in relation to each other is absolutely like necessary. And, from many different perspectives and, vantage points. So I think we're really, maybe really trying to think through this sort of abolition continuum in, in all of the work that we're doing.
What can I say? Yes to all, of course. Is anyone wanting to intervene, to say some some provocation or to ask a question, or I don't know, to extend in some unsuspected direction?
I have one more, and it's about in this relationship between species. What do you think about how we eat? Should we all go vegan? Do you think we can find like a way to how? I mean, I don't see a lot of solidarity of how do we feed ourselves nowadays, and but I still eat. I mean, I have my thoughts, and I think it's also. Or I don't know if you think that this is another subject that can fit in this description of multi-species storytelling.
Yeah, I think, Cara, that you wrote about a we, and maybe, yeah, Helen, if you also want to jump in. If I understand, Chris, you were asking about sort of the proposal of, you know, what maybe is our position, and or thinking about it, as you're saying, is veganism one type of approach or ways of thinking of different species relation? Yeah, I mean, I can say full disclosure, I am vegan. I've been vegan for more than half of my life now, so I'm one of those sort of old guard people. But I think that, you know, maybe much more what is sort of important in this, and is how to saying of like this question of, you know, the sort of we, and like understanding, you know, I think trying to be really critical, and I think trying to re-navigate and negotiate our, you know, relation to, you know, what we eat, how we live, all of these things, you know, not in the sense of a neoliberal capitalist sort of, you know, we can buy our way into sustainability, but that seeing the way that we live our lives and how we think of and how we relate to all species is a, you know, a transformative, I think, politics. It can be one, you know, of, I think, really sort of deep resonances of, you know, sort of solidarity, and also trying to formulate a different kind of political subjectivity. And so I think that, you know, and that can happen, I think, in many different ways. And that, you know, because I myself, as someone who's, you know, been vegan for so long, has seen as something that began as like a project of liberation, and those working very closely and clearly with, you know, hunt sabotage or people part of like the Animal Liberation Front. And now, you know, of course, like many vegan companies are owned by, you know, the largest multinational sort of, you know, conglomerates that are, you know, selling and producing much of the food in, you know, in the world. So I think that, you know, it becomes much more a question about how we consider and think about, you know, other forms. I really think of like local relations to, you know, sort of to place and to, you know, and to land, and how it has become so pervasive that we can very much, I think, take those things, you know, for granted. And that, of course, it is a bit different political question wherever we are, you know, in the world, of what it means, you know, to be vegan if we're in, you know, where I am in Northern Europe, versus, you know, if you are in the deep south of the United States, or if you're, you know, wherever else you might be in the world. So I think that, you know, I would, Helen, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, you know, in terms of the solidarities, you know, in terms of veganism, in terms of like food supply chains and so on. But then I think also there is the kind of, you know, also the question of like, actually, you know, our other kind of things that we're performing or kind of buying into in our day-to-day lives. And I think like one of the things that really struck us, I guess, when we were researching both the kind of game simulations of the polar bears and also the robotic dogs, was actually the way in which there's these kind of, we're really in this paradigm of kind of extreme violence of the image. And, you know, the kind of imaging and imaging technologies, whether that's a kind of, you know, the LiDAR on the robotic dog, or whether that is the kind of use of game simulations in order to train people how to build prisons or zoos, right? You know, actually the way in which particular types of practices are kind of contributing to the production of this image-based violence. And actually, you know, so much of the focus is around this kind of prowess of being able to generate and navigate the world through images and through a kind of visual sensing or scanning of the world. And I think, you know, maybe it's a time of us thinking in terms of kind of trans-species solidarity. You know, would we think about our kind of buy-in to image generating practices as much as we would in terms of veganism? Is that something, you know, that we might hold together as a type of poetics?
Thank you.
Okay, interesting thoughts. I will jump in with a very concrete one. Sorry for that, but I was not the incident, that like the news of the girl like surpassing the fence in the zoo, like, and being attacked by the bear that you use in the piece. When I was watching through it and scrolling through it, remind me of this story of the Werner Herzog documentary, The Grizzly Man. And then all of a sudden I was listening to the audio of this video that you use, and I think you use it as footage, sound source. I kind of think I recognize it, maybe I'm wrong. So a part of the documentary of this grizzly man, when he's like, oh my God, I'm shooting for the bears. I mean, I have it there, it's so big, or something like this. Well, then that made me fun, like, because I thought of the reference. And then just my question would be that the role of audio, no, in these videos. Did you use any other source that escape us? I mean, the spot video, for example, has a lot of voices, and the spot video where it's using the laser scanner, it has a lot of like audio there, like which creates a lot of tension, no? Because it seems like the robot is in a crowd, sometimes violently, sometimes not, because I think there is some football, but I'm not sure. Well, just a bit of concrete down to earth. Yeah,
I mean, I guess we can share that in relation to that particular video and the other one. So that scene where Spot is navigating through some kind of scene, right? And I guess there's an ambiguity there. Is it a protest? Is it a football match? Is it a simulated lab environment? But yeah, the sound is actually from recorded footage of a quite sort of well-known incident in the London protests, where the police kind of the police were riding horses through the protest, and one of the horses got loose, and that horse kind of ran through the protest. And it was kind of a moment, you know, actually the horse itself kind of actually became a kind of figure of kind of liberation, I guess, and kind of escaping both the kind of police's grasp and kind of removing itself from being kind of utilized to break up the riot. And so the sound that we use in this collage of Spot actually is kind of drawn from this moment in the London protests. Nice.
Yeah, and then I think that you know, mostly in the videos for the polar bears, there's none of from Grizzly Man, but there is other sort of, you know, the kind of ambient polar bear sounds that come from the different polar bear games that are either Planet Zoo or Zoo Tycoon. One where there's the polar bear habitat tour, that's the speed unbuilding. You know, you can often hear a lot of these sort of like ambient sounds, or the sort of grunts, or their paws hitting, you know, the sort of snow, and some of them, you know, sort of being basically games where you just have like kind of depressed polar bears that are sort of wandering around these like barren frozen tundras, and these games where, you know, which we didn't show or talk about, but one of them is looking at, you know, this game Planet Zoo, where it's basically, you know, you're building zoos in the same idea as if you would build, you know, an amusement park. And, you know, and one creator that actually, you know, took this upon himself to say, I'm going to build a zoo that's actually a prison. And so you see that through this, but then many of the other instances that you know, that normally the bears are, you know, sort of roaming these environments, or are also being put in them very specifically by humans for, you know, entertainment purposes. And so there's many videos and ones where some of the sound are taken, where it's like putting every single type of bear from the zoo in a too small cage and like basically making them like fight to the death. And there's like it's a huge, you know, there are many very like sort of extremely kind of gruesome films of this you know, that are done in these video games, and then creators creating them and then recording them, you know, for their channel. And so, yeah, so a lot of things are coming from those different built environments of the polar bears, and the polar bears interacting with, you know, with other polar bears in these contexts. I think that is the, yeah, and then other things that are sort of archival footage of Binky, the polar bear, and then some other things that are also the, on BBC, the other, I can't remember the man's name right now, but a man on the BBC who is someone who has a number of close encounters with polar bears, who we can hear as the voiceover at the end of Hang in There, Smash the Cam, who, you know, is kind of constantly putting himself at this sort of limit of danger of, you know, being in Antarctica and sort of filming these polar bears, but often narrating as well. It's like they're coming close to them because they are starving. It is, you know, the sea ice is melted. Normally they would be out hunting, you know, seals, and instead they're desperate for food. And so they're tracking down this camera crew. And so, you know, something that's being used as a, you know, as a site for sort of edutainment drama is actually, it's like you're you know, you're filming these polar bears starved to death, essentially. And so, you know, I think that for us, really trying to take, you know, from, and I think use these materials, of course, in a way where, you know, we're, I think in many of them too, like that we're using, you can see the National Geographic insignia or icon in the corner, like BBC and things like that, or you know, the footage that's coming from Boston Dynamics of, you know, Spot, or when Helen is using the simulator to then create like the Spot clusterfuck that from the program. But yeah, for us, I think really trying to have a relationship where, you know, we're drawing from a lot of different material, but at the same time, I think not being precious about it. And, you know, but in the same sort of ways, not wanting to necessarily always bring them a particular company or game or someone into focus, you know, and rather trying to, you know, I think look at how they're sort of operating and how they're using the technologies at their disposal.
Thank you. Nice stories.
Yeah, super nice. Yeah, thanks for sharing. I don't know, I think we could really continue for hours, because it's really like sparking in all directions. I think maybe we need to start like finishing. I don't know if how abruptly, or if there are things on the like pendant to bring. If I don't want to cut anyone just like that, so please tell them. In the meantime, I can just connect with these last interventions that have to do like more explicitly with image generating practices. And I find it especially interesting that this conversation is happening in the frame, in the context of a photography gallery, no? And because they are somehow provoking consideration on about what conversations need to take place around image generating practices. Like, for example, there was this one that's latent in your work, like pretty much latent, about the continuities and discontinuities between notions like animality, animacy, animation. And of course, yes, we could really like have a whole seminar about just that. So maybe it's not the moment for that, but I wanted to share the enthusiasm, because it's not that, it's, as you said, in DONE, maybe because of it being a framework for artistic research, which is not that often found, but concretely in the wider frame of image, like contemporary image practices, or even like photography and its evolutions or revolutions, that I think this makes total sense. So thank you so much for complexifying, problematizing, and keeping an eye on these issues that too easily fall into just industrial or engineering practices and somehow miss the political or the cultural or the communitarian or the transformative and abolitionist sensibilities that are needed. So I don't know. Yeah, as said, I don't know if there's anyone who wants to do a final comment or intervention. No? So then, Irene, maybe it's time to wrap up.
Yes, just a big thank you. It was super interesting. I think that we could spend here much more time talking and discussing about so many themes. So thank you very much for the project and brilliant presentation. It was a real pleasure to have you in this new edition of DONE, and hope to follow your new progress in new projects, of course.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Hara, as well, for chairing and fielding the conversation.
Yeah,
Yes.
Thank you, the whole curatorial team of DONE.
Thank you, Lu. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for this. Really, really great to hear all your thoughts and to engage with the work on so many different levels and perspectives. So really, really insightful and useful for us as well.
Maybe we can share the link of the project, the website,
Yes.
on the chat for
Do you have
everyone
it?
to grab it and take it.
Yeah, I can put it here. Just bypass that security message you may get when you try to access it.
It's exciting, you know.
Great, yeah, and you know, we're happy to stay in touch. You know, if anyone has questions that comes up afterwards, you can find us, I'm sure, somehow, and just be in touch with us.
Yeah, we'll be in touch.
We will definitely be in touch.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
So much.